So, with the TADC theatrical release coming out today, and the official free release coming later this month for everyone to watch for free, I decided to compile all my TADC character analysis essays into one large video for those of you who want more content after seeing the movie, or for those of you who want to brush up on which characters are which before actually watching the movie, what they do, how they think, all that stuff. I made this video for you guys. If you want thoughtful and meaningful TADC content, I promise you guys, you will absolutely love this video. There's a ton of psychology here, there's a ton of behaviorism here. You guys aren't going to want to miss this. Seriously, you're not going to want to. But before we begin, please leave a like and subscribe. Each of these videos has a ton of work put into them, and really, it's so surreal seeing them all placed together like this. With all that said, let's go ahead and begin with where all of it started. The most terrifying part of the digital circus isn't the fact that you're trapped. It's how it shapes you in that time, how it alters you and reminds you of things, both good and bad, never letting you forget. Not forgetting is Ragatha's curse, and it's what makes her one of the deepest, yet one of the most tragic characters in the entire digital circus. But how can a character so charming, so kind, and so selfless secretly be the most broken of them all? And why does no one talk about how disturbing her kindness really is? To understand Ragatha, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, to 2008. In the start, way back in 2008, much like Pomni, Ragatha was lost and scared, wanting nothing more than to escape the circus as soon as possible. And while she clung to the idea of escape for quite a long time, eventually, much like Kinger and the rest of the cast, she just stops and chooses to adjust to the dystopian circus lifestyle. This is an incredibly understated detail because it's told to us so quickly in episode 2 that we don't stop to realize that to a very fair degree, Ragatha has already given up on the possibility of ever escaping. This world, these adventures, it's what she chooses to ground herself in to remain sane. But because she's been there the second longest and understands how jarring life in the circus can be, when our main members of the cast arrive, she instead chooses to take on a more supportive role of the people around her. We see this especially in episodes 1 and 2 with Pomni in particular. Ragatha is incredibly observational of the effect that each journey is having on her. And more times than not, whenever we see her, it seems like she's more worried about Pomni than Pomni is about herself. It's a little peculiar, especially since Kinger, someone who's been there just as long and understands where she's coming from, isn't constantly monitoring the cast, but rather allowing them to adjust on their own. And while we don't get the most Ragatha scenes in episodes 1 through 3, we do see some very interesting things regarding her pretty early on. But episode 4 is where we start taking a deeper look at who Ragatha is and how the cast perceives her. In a deep conversation between Gangle and Pomni, we're reminded of the fact that Ragatha really doesn't just only try to be there for Pomni. This is something she tries to do for everyone. But ironically, it's what makes characters like Gangle suspect her. She listens to everyone and everything calmly, never shifting in tone, attitude, or demeanor. But rather than simply just being a kind act, it only raises questions. How much does she really care at the end of the day about the people that she's supporting? Is this just in her nature? Is this her being altruistic? Or is there some possible deeper meaning? We don't know, but episode 4 is the first time we see how other characters truly view her, and it's the first crack that we see when it comes down to Ragatha's character. But episode 5 especially is the turning point, because we see that it's not just Gangle who's suspicious of Ragatha. Jax is as well, but unlike Gangle, he's very open about what he thinks of her. He believes that Ragatha is someone who always prioritizes the positives in everything. This is not a compliment. Like Gangle, he thinks she tries too hard in doing this, and ironically, takes the meaning out of kindness. I think that final statement alone is why people like Jax end up becoming suspicious. Now, kindness is a great thing, right? A lovely thing, in fact. But when that kindness is constantly being thrown out to people left and right at the drop of a coin, it seems less like kindness as much as it becomes an attempt to appeal to everyone's good side. It takes the meaning out of what sincerity usually is. Now, at this point, you probably see a trend, right? People aren't against Ragatha or her kindness. They're against the fact that they know there's something looming deeper that's driving her affection. No one is that altruistic, nor is anyone simply that sincere with no reason drilled behind it. Even Pomni, someone who Ragatha has grown generally close to and can talk honestly with to some degree, agrees that being negative sometimes is a good thing. But you start seeing very specific symptoms when Ragatha does try to talk about negative things. She's always very quick to apologize, almost like she doesn't have a right to speak in that sort of tone whatsoever. That tells us that this goes far beyond just what she thinks is the right way to act. It's how she's wired. She wouldn't apologize for being human otherwise. But that brings rise to a very, very specific question. Why? Why does Ragatha apologize for expressing human emotions? At this point, we know that something happened. But what happened? What made her that way? In the very same episode, we get the answer for why that is, and it adds a whole new layer to this character that many people overlook. In the bar scene where each character is giving information about their real lives one by one, when we reach Ragatha, her story is drastically different. While she comes from a fairly wealthy family who amassed their funds through farming and the like, the tide of her tone shifts drastically as her relationship with her mother enters the picture. She starts with listing relatively normal things. Her mother was described to have yelled a lot, which, though not ideal, is normal in some households. But as she goes more into detail, piling on things such as guilt-tripping, berating, all while noticeably tensing up, it's clear that even though she doesn't outright express how she's feeling, this left a real lasting impact on her. It's something that bothers her, and it makes sense. Having to live under those circumstances from childhood to adulthood will reform you mentally. Yelling becomes something that you jump at. Criticism, both good and bad, becomes something that you run away from. Looking back at some of Ragatha's actions with this context, things make considerably more sense. By staying on everyone's good side and underscoring the positives in everything, the potential for that berating that she once had to deal with is minimized. The potential for that guilt-tripping, yelling, and everything in between to return is minimized. Looking at Ragatha's behavior, she aligns very deeply with something that I studied a few years back in psychology: operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a learning process developed by B.F. Skinner where behavior is controlled by its consequences. Reinforcement increases behavior while punishment decreases it. In Ragatha's case, by removing an unpleasant stimulus, which would be the possibility of anger or verbal harassment returning, the result is that behavior, which in Ragatha's case would be people-pleasing, appealing to everyone's good side, and being as kind as possible, all those actions become much more likely to be repeated. This entire theory is effectively a loop where behaviors are constantly underway, all with the goal being to remove a negative stimulus or feeling or possibility. The point is, by appealing to everyone's good side constantly, by trying to be the most supportive person in the room, she constantly traps herself in this box where she's going to keep trying to be the most supportive person in the room. That's why it seems like she's almost wired to be positive. She is subconsciously embedding those actions into her brain. I think later in episode 5, where she apologizes for letting her negative side slip out at all, reinforces that heavily. But there's still another layer that we haven't talked about yet. One where we don't have to infer how Ragatha may feel, but one where she tells us herself. In episode 6, in a very vulnerable conversation with Kinger, we hear some incredibly telling things, such as how, because she couldn't be there for Pomni in one particular instance, she feels like she failed her. The irony resting under all of that being that Pomni is a 25-year-old adult woman who is not asking nor forcing Ragatha to constantly be there for her. It's not her responsibility to constantly be there for Pomni, let alone everyone. Yet she continues trying to be, and when that fails, it becomes a personal failure that affects her directly. It's not healthy, and furthermore, it's something that will wear her down, erode her, and create this ball of self-hatred that will always eat away at her because she's trying to do the impossible. Relationships aren't designed for one person to constantly be on 120%. But what I noticed to be the most interesting part of this scene is that she isn't just blindly doing this. She knows that she tries hard to get on everyone's good side, and in doing this, she more often than not just pushes people away. We see this with Gangle. She doesn't want to confide in Ragatha because she can't tell what's real about her and what's not. But she's done this for so long, likely way before even entering the circus, that this has become ingrained in her nature. This is the episode where Ragatha stops being just the friendly big sister in the eyes of a lot of the audience and becomes the one who's silently suffering. The one who, underneath her protective shell, is the most broken, the most understated, and the most misunderstood of them all. It's only when Kinger explains to her that relationships are meant to be two-sided and one person should never be pulling all the weight that she opens up, speaking more to herself than she is to Kinger. The truth is, she doesn't know what exactly she wants, but at the same time she wants everyone to be happy and to not hate her. But there's something looming, something very grim that this scene beautifully underscores. Ragatha talks about these people who she wants to like her, Pomni, Gangle, Zooble, but what about herself? She spends so much time, not just in this conversation, but even outside of it, focusing on the well-being of others, but never, not a single time, is it about her own personal feelings towards herself. It's self-erasure at its finest, and based on everything she said throughout this conversation, there's only one thing laying underneath those words, something that Kinger very quickly notices and calls out. Do you hate yourself? A very cutting question that's ultimately met with silence and an immediate somber deflection. This scene is the most brutal for Ragatha, and not enough people understand it. The truth is, yes, she does hate herself. Not because she's a bad person who's done bad things, but because she's grown up to play such a role. A role where she's a martyr of her own happiness, someone who's always giving, never taking, seeing the irony of it all, yet still moving on autopilot. Ragatha's actions, if you guys couldn't tell, are very likely derivative of her childhood, or at the very least, her experiences with her mother. Even though we don't get complete confirmation of this, we can infer that when Ragatha's mother leaned into those actions of gaslighting, yelling, berating, her survival mechanism was likely to shrink herself, be as kind, as positive, and as martyristic as possible in the hopes that things would eventually just blow over. It's the same thing she does in the circus. This didn't just spring up out of nowhere. That's generally how it is when it comes to scars like this. How you act, the things you do, those never just randomly appear out of nowhere. You may do things a certain way your entire life without even knowing, all to avoid a certain outcome. Whether that outcome is similar to Ragatha's experience with her mother or something just as strong. The point is, things like that leave scars that are always visible in some way, shape, or form. That's because we're human. We're wired to let painful events linger and ultimately change us as we grow older. And speaking of letting painful events linger, that's kind of the crux of this scene, right? Though Ragatha is reminded that relationships are meant to be a two-sided process, she doesn't just magically get fixed. This conversation is more so the long and grueling start to acceptance, to self-love. Episode 8, where Kane puts the cast into a hell of their own memories, is a testament to that. Her hell, even after everything, is the looming shadow of her mother over the dinner table, having knives likely meant to symbolize words flung, cutting through her as she sits there, noticeably uncomfortable. It's as ironic as it gets. Someone who's meant to love you, be there for you, take care of you, and understand you on a level beyond anyone else, ultimately being the one to shape you in all the wrong ways. There's something so incredibly foreign about that. You'd think that the circus would have been the thing to break her mentally throughout all the journeys, all the meeting people and subsequently having them removed from your life just as fast as they came. But that's not the case. The circus, as dystopian as it is, only amplifies Ragatha's already existing pain. That's why no matter how long she's in the circus, she's still so grounded in the real world. Trying to be that person for everyone in her life as a survival mechanism, she still does that. The circus didn't break her by introducing something or someone new. It hollowed her out by zeroing in on what already exists. That's the real psychological horror of the circus. Whether that's the dystopian atmosphere itself or the reminder of a life you used to lead, there's nowhere to hide. You can't run, you can't escape. You are always surrounded by your vulnerability, your weakness. It's why people don't last. But at the same time, that's a testament to how strong Ragatha truly is, and it's why she's my favorite character. But beneath everything, every single thing we talked about, there's still an underlying tragedy, and that's the fact that there's no simple fix for Ragatha. If there were a simple fix for lingering trauma, the world would be a much happier place. In Ragatha's case, this is something that she's going to have to overcome one step at a time. Baby steps. Lots and lots of baby steps are what's needed to move forward, and unfortunately, I don't think we'll see that in episode 9. There's just not going to be enough time, but that's an entire video on its own. Anemones are a very versatile flower. While some, depending on the color, symbolize things like love, passion, protection, and anticipation, they also can symbolize fragility, loss, forsaken love. They're a very beautiful and nuanced flower, and they remind me very much of Ragatha, someone who yearns to protect, even if it's to hide her own fragility, someone who loves passionately even through her scars. That is Ragatha. But with all that said, how do you guys feel about Ragatha? Especially after episode 8, which chose to highlight some of her scars, both mentally and physically. I personally love her, but comment down all your thoughts below. If you guys enjoyed at any point, please be sure to like and subscribe. My goal by the end of this year is 10k maybe. It's been Jax, and I'll catch you all next time. Did you guys enjoy that one? If you did, let me know down below. But anyways, we have yet another very heavy-hitting video. This is a recent one. This is my Zooble video. You guys are gonna love this one too. So with all that said, let me just let you guys watch the video.
I don't like myself. I hate this body. I hate all these stupid removable pieces. I just want to find something that feels good.
Everyone in the circus, at some point, breaks. Whether it be due to the unique circumstances characters find themselves in, past trauma that resurges, it almost becomes a promise that eventually, you, like everyone else, will crack in that digital hell, becoming yet another one of the many, many statistics. But what if I told you that there is only one character, someone who you may not have even paid much attention to, that secretly opposes the circus? The story of Zooble and how they rejected the circus is one I don't think enough people recognize or understand, so let's explore it. But before we do that, we have to go back, all the way back to the beginning. The first time we meet Zooble, like the rest of our cast, is in episode 1, but their introduction is actually significantly different from everyone else. Not because they do things different necessarily, but rather because of the lack thereof things that they actually even do at all. From the very beginning, Zooble is defined by their resilience towards Cain and his adventures, something that Zooble very vocally dislikes. When they don't want to show up, they just don't show up. Because of this, though Zooble is dragged into an adventure in episode 1 by force, we actually don't see much of them for a while. In fact, we really don't see much of them at all until episode 3, The Mystery of Mildenhall Manor. This episode, though it isn't entirely focused on Zooble's character, makes up significantly for the lost time by giving us a deeper look into who Zooble is and why they reject the adventures so strongly outside of just not wanting to do them. In a mock therapy session created by Cain, we get the answer for Zooble's absence, and it runs a lot deeper than we could have thought. Zooble isn't necessarily rejecting the circus as much as they're rejecting themselves. The body, the one given to them when they enter the circus, to them is a burden. The removable parts, the clunkiness, the randomness, it doesn't feel like what Zooble wants. And that want is the human desire to naturally just feel good in their own skin. To feel like themselves without any caveats. I think it's very easy to see the circus as one big joke, but when you zoom in, these are real people stuck in this digital dystopia. These people wake up every day in this unfamiliarity. When you pair that with a body that doesn't match you, it makes for this almost grotesque experience. It's no wonder why Zooble rejects adventures. You don't even want to be in your own skin, let alone in some place just as foreign as the circus. But beyond that, I also feel that this reveal has a hidden layer that the story sort of tries to distract you from. But before we get to that, I want you guys to hone in on this scene right here and tell me what you think is off.
I don't like myself. I hate this body. I hate all these stupid removable pieces.
Comment down below what you think it is. You guys can pause here if you want to. What's wrong with it? I'll give you guys a few moments. The problem with this line that I noticed is that there's something lurking, almost hiding in a way. Zooble is hiding, refusing to commit to one core conflict. I don't like myself is one thing, but that reveal is buried under the subsequent this body. I hate all these stupid pieces. It could be a Freudian slip. Maybe Zooble didn't mean to say that they don't like themselves, but ultimately they did. And it's a cherry on top of this entire conflict that finally lets us in. It's not just about the body. Zooble doesn't like themselves. Why that is, we don't quite know, and we don't need to know. That's not the point. That self-dislike, it's almost compounded by this body, which, as Zooble has already told us, doesn't feel good. It's a unique sort of hell that I find to be so disturbing, and looking back, the story has already been letting us into this conflict in very subtle ways, despite us not even seeing much of Zooble until this point. Look back at episode 1, for example. After rejecting Kane's adventure, they're pulled apart and their pieces are carried all around the circus. They even get consumed by the Gloink Queen at one point. This entire time, they're powerless, stripped of any form of independence. It's a terrible feeling and a terrible position to be in that naturally, to some degree, makes you dislike what's taking away your agency, and that, at its core, is this unbearable body. Or in episode 2, this one is very subtle, but after rejecting yet another one of Kane's adventures, there's this scene where Zooble is walking away and you can see that they trip over their own leg. It's a subtle moment, but it tells us that Zooble is still not used to this body or these parts, so much so that they can barely even walk without tripping. I find things to be so much more tragic as well because, believe it or not, Zooble does follow Kane's advice. They go through the box of parts given to them specifically to match the ambidextrous nature of their avatar, mix and match episode by episode, and nothing fits, works, or feels good. You're seemingly given all this freedom, but it's an illusion. A pretty unfair one at that. The other characters simply don't have to deal with this. Pomni isn't being torn apart and juggled around. Jax isn't being consumed by the Gloink Queen. That detail alone, that loneliness in the middle of loneliness, contributes to the sheer isolation of Zooble as a character, which is such an understated detail. Episode 3 does a lot of work, and it's also the seamless turning point for Zooble's character. After this episode, they're sort of forced back into the narrative as Kane no longer lets them skip out. That means that, whether they like it or not, they're essentially forced to partake in the chaos and, in the process, interact with their peers more, which we actually haven't seen much of besides the brief moments at the start and end of episodes. We see this in full swing for the first time all throughout episode 4, which is technically the first adventure that Zooble has been a part of. While some of their connections are hit or miss for the duration of the episode, such as with Jackson, arguably even Ragatha, one character in particular had a very interesting effect on Zooble that I don't think is talked about enough, that being Gangle. Episode 4 establishes a very subtle parallel between these two characters. I explained this in my Gangle video, but Gangle and Zooble inherently are different from the rest of the cast. I know I just talked about how no one can really understand Zooble because of how different they are fundamentally, but Gangle actually does, and this is the first episode where these two characters interact to really any meaningful degree. At the start of the episode, Zooble, understanding what Gangle's going through with them bearing the same burden of these unfair avatar gimmicks, gives her the ability to experiment. When that fails, much like Zooble's own conflict, at the end of episode 4, we get a phenomenal conversation that says so much about these two characters and what both their arcs will look like.
The mask didn't work, and now I don't think anybody wants to talk to me anymore.
The new mask was a bust. So what? I'm sure we'll find something that works eventually.
The line from Zooble, "I'm sure we'll find something that works eventually," is especially telling. This isn't just about helping Gangle find a mask that works. It's almost like a sort of hope injected back into themselves about potentially finding pieces that work as well, which is already such a stark contrast to what we saw back in episode 3. Before, while talking to Kane, their tone was dejected. They were sure that nothing for them was resting in that box of parts. But contrary to that realization, we see that they don't just resign. Not only have they continued searching, but even through that hesitation, stepped up to be that person for Gangle. Even though they're both in the thick of it together, it becomes this sort of connection that fundamentally changes these two characters. That gap between feeling alienated from everyone around you and having someone who understands you is massive. In the real world, that alone can reshape how you view the world. In the circus, I imagine it has a similar impact. The first 4 episodes, depending on how you look at them, actually do a lot for Zooble. However, we never really actually just stop to take a look at who Zooble is outside of the circus and the avatar gimmicks. We know their problems, but not them, and knowing who they are is going to be crucial for how their arc changes. Episode 5, Untitled, slows the pace of the story down considerably in favor of giving each of our characters the opportunity to tell us more about themselves, and Zooble naturally falls into that camp. In the iconic bar scene, which was actually Zooble's suggested adventure for this episode, we get a look into their life. We immediately learn that Zooble worked as a bartender, which makes sense. They're the one who suggested this adventure in the first place, so to them, it's a little return to normalcy of some sort, just like Fast Food Masquerade was for Gangle. But on top of that, we also learn that Zooble worked as a tattoo artist for some years. Zooble's real life in the scene is unveiled in a very unique way, and you only notice that after reflecting on what everyone says. The cast, for the most part, circles one thing they did in particular. For Gangle, that was temporarily art school, but mostly her working in fast food after. For Pomni, that was being an accountant while chasing thrills when things got boring. For Ragatha, working in real estate. But Zooble doesn't necessarily just do one thing, and it tells you a lot about where they may have been in the real world. They were likely still experimenting. Being a tattoo artist for a few years before pivoting to a bartender, that to me is the hallmark of someone either moving up in the world or trying to find a place where they belong or something that they want to do long term. And thinking about it like that, that's kind of reflective of their current circumstances in the circus. They're constantly moving, day in and day out, scavenging for parts in their box and even wild parts around the circus, all to find a place where they can belong, somewhere they can just exist comfortably. In addition to episode 5's characterization of Zooble, I do have to say, all these jobs and hobbies reflect this character and the things we've seen them do throughout the series almost perfectly. Zooble's character until this point has been pretty notorious for leaning more towards that adult side of the spectrum, right? That sort of matches that bartender and tattoo artist vibe. Zooble curses the most out of the entire cast. They're also the most suggestive. There was that one episode where Zooble asked Kane if he could add sex to the circus. Now that I'm thinking about it, is that implying that there's someone in the circus Zooble wants to do that with? I'll leave that up to you guys to discuss. Anyways, you get the idea. Untitled is a remarkable episode because it's a reset for everyone. It's a bubble outside of the madness for at least a day, and it naturally leads us into episode 6, which is the next step for Zooble's evolution as a character. Believe it or not, you guys, but Zooble's character is evolving rapidly episode by episode. The fact that they're willing to do adventures at all, such as what we see in episode 5, is the ultimate proof of that, and it's important to recognize this. Their evolution isn't explosive. It happens quickly, but at the same time, very subtly, and this is something that episode 6 especially leans into in an incredibly meticulous way. Zooble's model is notorious for changing look. There's never one episode where a combination of parts is used more than once. This is, of course, due to Zooble rapidly changing around and experimenting with parts, but sometimes, as you'll notice, these parts align in a very intentional manner to create a subtle yet very telling picture through symbolism. The combination of pieces used in episode 6, They All Get Guns, is a phenomenal example of this. Take a look at this combination here. While the right side is generally composed of more forgettable pieces, the generic, almost defaulty looking ones, the left side has this sort of overarching theme. Behind the left arm rests a singular wing, and also on the left part of the chest, there's what looks to be a massive star. These two parts, to me, remind me of the sky. You have a wing representing a sort of bird or any flying animal, and you have this star creating this picture of something or someone soaring through the night sky, gazing up above at the stars, basking in the most ultimate form of freedom there is. That ability, that privilege to exist in this state of pure and utter tranquility without anything in the world holding you down. This combination represents peace, growth, and a form of satisfaction. In fact, we see the symbolism behind this combination in full effect around halfway through this episode in one of, if not Zooble's most impactful moments. When asked, how are you meant to love the parts of yourself that make you so much worse than everyone else, by a defeated Gangle, the answer to Zooble is clear. Gangle assumes that Zooble is so above this because of how collected they usually are, but their response proves otherwise. The only thing you can do is let those parts of yourself in. The parts that you hate, the parts that you dislike, everything that you perceive as you being worse. While Gangle and even the audience might just see this as logical, straightforward advice, this is based on lived experience that you've seen all throughout this video. Zooble made it clear early on in the series that they didn't like themselves or the situation they were in. So, what changed? What allowed them to be the voice of reason in this scene? What changed was that Zooble learned that the only, and I can't emphasize this enough, the only way to move forward, to get in a position where you can be happy in some way, is to, even if forcefully, let those parts of yourself in. The truth that Gangle nor a lot of people watching this probably don't realize is, it doesn't matter whether or not you want to let those parts of yourself in. Ultimately, when you wake up, you will still be you. When you go to sleep, you will still be you. To move forward, especially if you're stuck in a sort of quicksand that you just can't escape, that's day in and day out, compounded by your negative feelings towards yourself, is to let yourself in, even if forcefully. Because, realistically, what's the alternative? Hating yourself forever? Succumbing to a difficult situation or a difficult point in your life? What does that fix? Who does that help? Certainly not you. And Zooble's answer maintains that truth. Even if it's unnatural, even if it comes off as alien or dystopian, sometimes you have to just let those parts of yourself in. Not because you want to, but because you have no other choice. Up until this point, the body Zooble hated was always an obstacle to overcome at every single turn. It was something that always worked against them. It took away their agency. It looks like a joke, even compared to the other silly circus models. It was always something to hate, something to conquer. But in this episode, while facing off against Jax and Pomni, for the first ever time, Zooble utilizes this body in a different way, making use of the additional arms to double their firepower. Zooble plays into the weirdness of this model, and you know what? The very moment they did this was the very moment that they changed. It's a period of clarity, acceptance. It's when you finally stop fighting yourself and, much like what Zooble told Gangle, finally let those parts of yourself in. This moment naturally leads us into episode 7, Beach episode, where for the first time Zooble outright says,
I've been starting to think that maybe the ability to change is fine, not needing to commit to one thing all the time.
The avatar becomes less of a curse as much as it becomes a vessel for a unique sort of freedom. Sure, it still has all sorts of things that they don't like, but to mend that, they can always just change things around until they find something that fits. It's not all bad unless they choose to solely focus on all the things that make it bad. This shift in perspective, while it's already impactful, becomes one of the things that, in my opinion, makes Zooble one of, if not, the most underrated characters in the Amazing Digital Circus, and let me explain why as it ties into the entire theme of this video. So far we've covered Pomni, Ragatha, Jax, and Gangle, and between all these characters, there's been one overarching thing that everyone has in common. At some point, for whatever the reason, the circus in its own unique and tragic way breaks all these characters in ways that alter them permanently. By permanently, I mean from episode 1 all the way to the end of the series, which is going to be episode 9. For Pomni, it's that shatter of the psyche, that learned helplessness that defines how she interacts and how she perceives the circus from episode 1 all the way to the end. For Jax, it's how he views the entire thing as one giant joke to maintain distance and cope with the madness, permanently altering how he communicates and navigates the circus as a person. For Ragatha, it hones in on her existing trauma where she plays the role of a people pleaser, locking her into this role where she overburdens herself with constantly trying to be that person for everyone. Everyone breaks for good in one way or another, but we see the opposite happen with Zooble. That same chaos that crushed everyone, they instead took it, and by rejecting it, turned it into a form of a blessing, something that no one else in the circus has done. In evolving, they also become a beacon of light, both for some of the cast and even the audience. I saw this especially in episode 8. When Pomni brings up the idea of abandoning escape as a whole, everyone is dejected. After what happened in Beach episode, morale was already low, and no one even has the will to complain anymore. The entire start of the episode is practically dedicated to the will that Zooble still has, even through their loss. While everyone is downcast, Zooble remains very vocal about how they don't want to just give up on escape, about how they still have dreams they were trying to accomplish, goals beyond just having been a bartender and a tattoo artist at one point. That flame inside them continues burning, and it continues, and it continues, even if after everyone else, it finally goes out. Zooble, like most TADC characters, represents a very real struggle that, being honest, surprised me on first watch. Their character is meant to reflect the struggle of someone who lives with body dysmorphia. Even though we may perceive it as wacky through the context of Zooble, who's like a sort of ant hybrid creature or something, this is a real thing, and I believe this story captures the darkest side of it. The side where you feel like a prisoner in your own skin. That side where that dysmorphia mixes into a personal dislike where you feel unsatisfied being what or who you are. It's a hell of its own creation, and it's one with no simple fix, because the reality is, as Zooble told us, is to over time let those parts of yourself in, even if you hate it, because the alternative is hating yourself forever. It's a powerful arc that, in some ways, kind of speaks to everyone. Everyone has felt cursed. Everyone has felt stuck. Everyone has at some point hated themselves. But the only way out of a hole is to 1, stop digging, and 2, start to climb. Either you grab those walls and scale like hell, or sit there and starve knowing that no one is going to come and do the work for you. Ultimately, you need to be the one to save yourself and become the best version of you. That's what I hope you guys take away from this video through Zooble. With all that said, thank you guys so much for watching. It's been Jax. If you enjoyed at any points, please be sure to like and subscribe. There are only a few characters of the main cast left before the TADC series is over. Be sure to put on noties so you guys don't miss that, and so you guys don't miss my TADC movie when it releases. Thank you guys, and I'll see you all next time. I had a blast working on the Zooble video, but the next one is a little bit different as we're covering a controversial character, Jax, and we're figuring out whether or not he can truly be redeemed. This one is less psychological and more about moral. Nonetheless, this one is still very entertaining and you guys will really like it. The Amazing Digital Circus has a lot of divisive characters. However, who seems to constantly be at the forefront more often than not is Jax. At a first glance, Jax comes off as more of a bully than anything, someone who sees those around him as less and treats them as such. Because of these actions, he's become quite divisive both for the audience and even the characters. But like most Digital Circus characters, Jax has a hidden side that gives weight to a lot of his actions that people don't quite fully understand. But whether that excuses him or not, that's for you guys to discuss and figure out in the comments. Let's begin. Like the rest of the Digital Circus cast, we first meet Jax in episode 1, and though the episode isn't centered on him at all, we get a general understanding of what sort of person he is in such little time. He's the one who breaks the group dynamic in all the worst ways. He's cynical, straightforward, and very carefree. That is the crux of his character that's always been who he is. All these sides constantly show throughout episode 1 when Jax does things like shatter any illusion of escape for Pomni once she arrives, ripping off Zooble's arm to scratch his back, kicking around Gangle for seemingly no reason at all, and never missing a chance to say something about Ragatha. While he's no doubt interesting to observe, he is effectively the black sheep of the cast, and though he's friendly with our characters to some degree, calling them friends is a little bit of a stretch. Episode 2 underscores this exact conflict beautifully. We've already seen him do things like kick around Gangle or rip apart Zooble, but in this episode his destructive actions are truly put on full display, such as when he grabs Pomni by the neck and throws her in between two moving trucks, or when the team completes their objective and he ultimately destroys an AI kingdom just out of a yearn for violence. Episode 2 does a great job at highlighting how little Jax seemingly cares for others. That becomes his thing, his overarching arc that the story wants you to understand. But at the same time, episode 2 also subtly sets up his internal battle. Towards the end of the episode, when the funerals for the abstracted are revealed, we see a very telling look from Jax that is vastly different from all his other expressions. When the funeral is brought up at all, he starts by looking dismissive. That's usual. But for a brief moment, you can see a tinge of sadness that's immediately overturned by his desire to retain this cynical persona. Ultimately, he never goes to the abstracted's funeral, but his actions expose that this is something that does genuinely bother him. But unfortunately, we don't see that side of him again for a while. It's not until episode 5 that we see the pain that this character might be hiding. The entirety of Stargazing is generally dedicated towards putting a crack in Jax's mask. To begin with, in a rebuttal to Ragatha about his treatment towards Gangle, he reveals that to at least some degree, he does care about the feelings of others. Though that might seem small, that is actually massive. This shocked our characters, particularly Pomni, who really thought that he was just an insensitive jerk. But that's only the prelude to the real gut punch. When Pomni asks if Jax has any friends and Ragatha subconsciously responds with, "Not anymore," we see a very tangible shift in demeanor. In only seconds, he goes from his usual mildly irritated expression to infuriated. But in his own words, it's nothing. Who cares? This whole conversation is incredibly telling, and even though it doesn't tell us everything bar for bar, we understand the general story. If Jax had friends at one point but he doesn't anymore, that means that his friends most likely abstracted. That would align with him skipping Kaufmo's funeral. Though we understand that, it raises a question. Why doesn't Jax have friends anymore? Though the cast generally are more often than not disillusioned by his actions, they don't hate him. Yet they aren't his friends. Why? This time we don't have to wait long for answers. In episode 6, for the first time in the entirety of the Digital Circus, we witness Jax spend some quality bonding time with someone. That someone being Pomni. The two make a great team, and to a certain degree, Pomni even understands him. Or at the very least, she understands how he thinks and can get behind it. Though the circus sucks and everyone hates it, the silver lining is that nothing's real. There's no consequences to your actions, no punishments aside from abstracting, so you can lean back and do whatever you want. That is Jax's mindset, and briefly Pomni's as she absorbs this, getting closer to Jax one step at a time. For anyone with two eyes watching, it is clear from every angle that Jax and Pomni bonded. That is undeniable. Yet for some reason, at the end of the episode, Jax denies it. It makes no sense, not to the audience and not to Pomni. They shared a vision, and even if briefly, they trusted one another. So what happened? Did Pomni do something wrong? Are things moving too fast? This scene does a phenomenal job at telling you straight to your face that if you want a direct answer out of Jax, you aren't going to get it. But by this point, all of us, including Pomni, can understand Jax to some degree, and what makes him so divisive as a character and as an individual in the circus. But let's rewind just a few moments back. Before this scene kicked off, we get an incredibly telling sequence of frames. For starters, Jax is sitting alone on the verge of getting up and following Pomni, but as he watches her run by, his vision shifts to people who have abstracted, Kaufmo and Ribbit. And it's here that we see that brief crack again, just like earlier. The parallel to Pomni running by while he finds himself lost, reflecting on those who have abstracted, that alone gives us all the answers that we need. The truth is, yes, he was bonding with Pomni, but Jax isn't denying the obvious because things are moving too fast or because Pomni did something wrong, but rather because he's scared. It's why he doesn't attend funerals. It's why he treats everyone so poorly. It's the basis for generally all of his actions. He's scared of getting close to people again and having them abstract like Kaufmo and Ribbit. The way Jax maintains distance with the rest of the cast to protect himself is by being a jerk, by being cynical, and by acting like nothing matters at all. But this is again why he's so divisive as a character. It's easy to understand him, but in the same vein, he's still someone who has done real damage. Being a bully isn't cool. Treating others poorly, even if it means protecting yourself, is not cool. Hurting people's feelings isn't cool, and that draws us back to the scene at the end of episode 6. After being confronted, Jax goes all out on Pomni, trying his best to convince her, or really himself, that she means nothing to him. That he was just leading her on so this moment would hurt her all the more. That, in combination with Jax's breakdown at the end of the episode, realizing that ultimately this really does bother him, he shifts from your typical, cynical, carefree jerk to a character who is actively hurting, to someone who has been hurt by the circus, yet is trying to mask that pain. But this is still just the start, the first layer of Jax's deconstruction. Episode 7, Beach Episode, is one of the most important episodes for Jax for a variety of reasons. To begin with, Jax almost abstracts. That alone is incredibly telling. From the start of the Amazing Digital Circus, they make it quite clear that people don't just abstract out of nowhere. When people are at their wits' end, when they absolutely cannot take life in the circus anymore, they transcend. Those conditions aligned, and if not for Pomni and Ragatha, he would no longer be around. But in the context of this scene, it's important to not just say what happens, but digest it as well. Though Jax is interacting with people like normal and walking around with people like normal throughout the duration of the episode, deep down, out of everyone in the cast, he is the one who is struggling the most. To stand at the edge of abstraction, a period that is defined as the breaking point of a person's psyche, that tells you a lot about the actuality of his mental state. He's not simply just struggling. He's one lonely night in the circus away from leaving for good. But though the near abstraction was telling, the next scene is one that established a whole new layer of what it means to be divisive. Something that goes beyond just mere bullying and stretches into territory of truly morally gray behavior. Episode 7 is the turning point for the digital circus, and at the same time the turning point for Jax's character. With the introduction of Abel, who gives them the possibility of a way out, everyone has to give it their all. They only have one shot. But with their combined efforts, they eventually reach Kane's office and find themselves face to face with the computer that may actually allow them to leave. In this room, they're greeted by two buttons. One button to exit the circus for good, and another button to stay. But the answer should be straightforward. The entire cast came this far to leave, after all. Or so we thought. When the realization sets in that this is really the make or break moment for their time spent in the circus, Jax goes off the rails. In a panic, he hits the button that forces everyone to stay in the circus. Now, as we know, both the buttons were duds, and temporarily, Jax is bailed because of that, but this scene showed us a number of things. The first and most important one being that Jax was willing to keep everyone trapped in the circus forever. That's not just a decision that can be overlooked or forgotten. At the end of the day, everyone has a family and someone or something waiting for them on the other side. Keeping everyone trapped here is effectively ignoring their lives. That's far beyond just being divisive at this point. He's leading into morally gray territory where he's less of a trustworthy ally and more so someone who will work against them when it truly counts. But the reveal why he did this is what gives the scene emotional weight. This reveal is also what divided even more people on this already divisive character, specifically in how they perceive him and whether or not he's justified. When the thought of returning home crosses his mind, even for a moment, he panics. We see a few flashes of the real world, presumably his home, maybe a place in particular attached to bad memories, and it's this remembrance that sparks his breakdown. It tells us a lot without telling us anything at all. If he chose staying in the circus, a place that has historically already hurt him on numerous occasions, a place that prides itself on being dystopian and breaks people because of that same chaos, that's a testament to how damaging his home life likely was. So now we're caught in the middle of this awkward limbo. Jax has done real emotional damage to the cast. He's slipped himself into the role of the black sheep, and he's even sabotaged the cast in what could have been a chance to return to normalcy. But what's riding those actions at the center of everything is a long-standing trauma, almost a sort of conflicting trauma even. There's something at home that Jax is afraid of. Choosing dystopia over that says enough. And at the same time, he's still grieving people who are no longer here, refusing to let anyone in, and choosing to cope by maintaining a form of hostile distance. It's two conflicting forces, and it's the barrier between trauma and accountability. People understand him. That's not the problem. They've always understood him to some degree. The question is whether that's enough. Does trauma override everything? Does he deserve to be forgiven? Can he be forgiven? This carries into episode 8. Now, episode 8 in particular does a phenomenal job at highlighting Jax's ongoing internal conflict. To paraphrase, he does not want to return home like everyone else. Or at the very least, it's not one of his current priorities. When the crew has a breakthrough with Kinger, we see yet another breakdown, realizing that escape is in sight. We already knew Jax was hanging on by a thread, but if more proof of that was needed, this episode gives it to you in every way, shape, and form. But by this point, rather than stacking evidence, we're left asking, why? Why does he want to stay in the circus? We've known since his first appearance that in some way, shape, or form, he does find solace in the dystopian atmosphere, feeling a pull to the freedom and chaos. But is that it? Episode 8 explicitly shows us that it's not. When Kane loses it and puts everyone in a hell of their deepest fear, Jax's in particular is very brutal. We see people circling him, overcome by a never-ending laughter, while he sits there on the floor nervous, anxious, and afraid. One person in the crowd even grabs him by the ears and tears him apart, exposing the yellow, vulnerable undercoat usually hidden behind the purple rabbit. Though this scene has many interpretations, I think the consensus is that this is meant to symbolize his deep, never-ending fear of opening up to people again. The people circling him aren't just faceless dolls like we see in Ragatha's hell. They're people we've seen, people we know. It's Pomni, Kaufmo, and Ribbit, all people that we've seen him grow close to or express some form of care for regardless of his constant denial. These people who he perceives as his friends, ironically are the ones ripping off his first layer, his protective mask, and once he's exposed, laugh at who he really is. It's his entire conflict that we've seen from episode 1 encased in one brutal scene. It tells us that Jax isn't just afraid of opening up, he's afraid of being mocked, afraid of letting people in and ultimately losing them. Kaufmo, Ribbit, these are two people that he's lost, and it seems like such a small amount, but these are human lives at the end of the day. These are people who you form memories with, connections. Once they leave, you never get that connection back. All that's left is a hole. It makes sense why Jax chooses to act carefree in the circus, whether it's in the context of Kane's games or socially. He tried taking things seriously, and unfortunately, it didn't work. But whereas every other character managed to get over these losses, choosing to honor them through the funerals, letting them rest in peace while they continue moving through the chaos, Jax hasn't. They still live on vividly in his mind. He's constantly hurting. And after a while, he stops looking at the situation for what it is and starts secluding himself from the world. Yes, it's a survival mechanism. Yes, he is scarred. And yes, it is sad. But as much as we can sympathize with the character and understand their actions, in the context of Jax, that might not be enough, especially as we approach episode 9. As many fans have started realizing, it's not so easy to just side with Jax. That's not because people are unwilling to see him for who he truly is, it's because of how the story has portrayed him since the very beginning. He's constantly been the bully type, the cynical type. He's hurt people, his treatment of Pomni, his lack of care for Gangle, his constant back and forth with Ragatha. Those all contribute to the greater picture. I know I've thrown around morally gray a few times throughout this video, but I want you all to sit with the idea that Jax is morally gray as a character. He's meant to be morally gray as a character. I didn't even bring up the fact how he chose to keep everyone trapped in the circus, otherwise spoiling their only shot at escape. He's done a lot of things, and unfortunately, he still hasn't come around yet for a redemption arc, if it's even possible to redeem him after the last 8 episodes have meticulously established him as someone on the other side of the fence. But looking at all of who Jax is in hindsight, all I can say is, it's a little unfortunate that people don't quite understand his character. I think people are very quick to pick a side. Jax is either horrible or he's amazingly written, but people often forget that both can exist at the same time. I think a lot of meticulous work has gone into crafting him. As is the case with a lot of digital circus characters, this isn't just a cartoon dilemma. Jax eerily mirrors a lot of what you see in today's society. A lot of people who have been hurt often cope by hurting others. That's common amongst bullies. You see it all the time. Bullies are secretly some of the most hurt people deep down. But you even see it a lot in adults as well. The reality of the world is that people get hurt. That's just the sort of planet we exist on. But to find some form of peace, people find coping mechanisms for that pain. Just like in my Ragatha video, we talked about her using kindness as a form of a coping mechanism. That's one of many examples. But on the other side of the coin, some people fight fire with fire. In turn to getting hurt, people hurt back. That's Jax. But at the end of the day, whether it's real life or the Amazing Digital Circus, there's really no excuse to hurt people. That's where the story intentionally allows Jax to fall flat. Your pain is your pain at the end of the day. Everyone is suffering. If you think for a moment that Jax is the only one dealing with things in the circus, you are very wrong. The difference is not everyone is using that as an excuse to take it out on people. I think that, being honest, Jax is a very interesting character. He quite frankly never tells us anything regarding himself, but we find answers for why he is the way he is in the things that he doesn't say. That is very powerful writing. Being able to convey full character arcs without any detailed dialogue from the character themselves, I love that. But something is still missing in Jax's arc. We have a start, we have a middle, but we don't have an end. That end will either redeem him or let him plummet farther into the pit. What do you guys think will happen regarding Jax? There's still 1 episode left, so I'm sure we'll see at least something. Following that, what do you guys think about Jax in general? Anything you want to add, anything you want to recontextualize? Let us know down below. If you enjoyed this video at any points, consider leaving a like and subscribing. That would absolutely mean the world. It's been Jax, no correlation, and I'll see you guys next time. After talking about Jax and the many bad things he's done throughout the story, it's only fitting that next we look into someone who deals with the internal consequences of his behavior, Gangle, and why the audience ignored her despite her being such a compelling character. You guys are really gonna like this one.
How are you supposed to like the part of yourself that just makes you worse than everyone else?
There's a lot of ways in life to hide how you feel about things. People-pleasing, passivity, deflection, and the list goes on and on. But one of the most disturbing and one of the most prominent that I believe we have all experienced at some point is the hell known as self-erasure. Self-erasure is an incredibly vague term on its own, but in the context of the Amazing Digital Circus, there's one form that's so interwoven with all our characters. That being masking. The idea of hiding who you are, how you feel, and maybe even the things you like behind a facade, whether voluntary or involuntary. But one character in particular, a ribbon, one with an aura so subtle that they almost disappear into the background with each passing episode, captures this tragedy so perfectly in an incredibly human way. So with all that said, let's take a closer look, a deeper dive into the mask-wearing ribbon, Gangle, and why you should care for the circus's punching bag. From the very first moment we meet Gangle in episode 1, it doesn't take long for the story to show us that she's different. But the reason why requires a little bit of explaining. When it comes to avatars in the circus, there's generally two types. The first being the standard models, which characters like Jax, Pomni, Kinger, Ribbit, and most of the cast fall into. And while these models have their own unique gimmicks such as the breathing stuff, they're generally very hands-off. You just sort of exist with what you get, just like a regular person in the real world does. But then you have the more dynamic models, the models that characters like Zooble and Gangle fall into. Now, on top of these models having the same breathing gimmick as the standard ones, these ones also have one special addition that differs from person to person. In Zooble's case, their model functions as a sort of toy, kind of like Mangle from Five Nights at Freddy's. It can be pulled apart, pieces can be rearranged, and in a much similar fashion, Gangle's mask follows the same logic. By default, she's given a comedy mask, which has a constant, fixed, happier expression. But when the comedy mask is broken, which becomes a trend from episode to episode, what's resting under is a teary-eyed mask, which is known as the tragedy mask. Now, to be clear here, these masks don't lock Gangle into a specific emotional state. I've seen some people think that. Instead, these masks are meant to be much more psychological. The comedy mask is her default state. By having that mask on, she can be normal and she can blend in with everyone else. But when it's broken, what's left is this downpan expression that really does affect how everyone in the show perceives her. It creates this idea that without her comedy mask, her normal mask, she is wrong. But stepping outside of just the psychological aspect of these avatars, immediately what you may notice is that, despite having quite the freedom to experiment, everything almost feels predetermined. Everyone else can move their bodies however they want, make whatever expressions they want. But Gangle and Zooble simply don't have that same freedom, despite the story giving you that sort of illusion. They can pick and choose from already arranged things scattered around the circus, but, and I mean this in a literal and figurative way, none of these things reflect who they truly are. It's kind of like a prosthetic limb. You can replace a part of you, but ultimately that limb is just not you. It was crafted to be assigned and distributed to anyone who may need it. That analogy is just for one limb. Now, imagine a whole entire body that simply is not yours. That is the paradox of these dynamic models. But understanding the model is only the first piece to understanding the character. So, who exactly is Gangle? Gangle as a character has always been more so on the reclusive side, with Jax even joking in episode 2 that she's meant to be
submissive and agreeable,
proving that to some degree this is her perceived status in the group. This idea that Gangle is meant to be the submissive one becomes a recurring trend for Jax in particular, that he reinforces at every given opportunity. But beyond just Jax treating Gangle a certain way, the narrative itself follows in his shoes, painting a very clear picture as to how Gangle is to be perceived. Look at some of her scenes, for example. In episode 1, her comedy mask is broken and she's also continuously kicked around for no reason. In episode 2, before things even kick off, she's bumped into by an NPC, causing her comedy mask to break, only to be forced to drive moments later by Jax, who constantly hurls insults at her, all while aiming a Sweets-themed shotgun in her face. For the first half of the story, a considerable emphasis is put on the sheer fragility of Gangle as a character. But in episode 4, things start to change. Before anything adventure-related happens in this episode, Zooble, understanding how Gangle feels in a way like no other member can, gives her a new mask, a plastic one that shouldn't break as easily. This one has a deep grin, and though it doesn't bring rise to an immediate, spectacular feeling, it, at the very least, makes her feel different. It makes her feel normal. That's the motto of this entire episode. Normal. Out of all of Kane's recommended adventures, Gangle wants to do the fast food one. Not because it's the most entertaining, but because it reminds her of her own life outside the circus. It's nothing more than a brief return to normalcy, with a mask that should make everything fit into place. And for a while, the mask does make everything fit into place. Gangle, with the help of this new mask, does a complete 180. She's putting people in their place, getting punishments for employees who aren't working properly. You'd think she was ripped out the plastic by the way she was acting brand new. But that's exactly where the cracks begin to show. Gangle becomes almost consumed by power in a way. When her authority is challenged, when her newfound status, resolve, demeanor, cadence, when any of these things are challenged, she snaps. Moment after moment. This mask that was meant to symbolize a return to calmer times gradually becomes a burden that even the kindest characters like Ragatha, albeit under the influence of stupid sauce, cannot stand. It's the sobering realization that this thing Gangle had gradually started romanticizing is just a mask. It's not her. This realization has very deep undertones. This is a message to anyone in the world who prides themselves on masking, whether it be at school, at work, or out in public. No matter what, if you are masquerading around as someone else for whatever reason, while that may work for you in the start, just like Gangle, deep down you will eventually realize that's just not you. I think we all have had realizations like this, especially sometimes when we're younger and we internalize our flaws and carry those things into adulthood. It's a sad thing that everyone should take a moment to think about. When you go out into the world, are you you? Or are you trying to play the role of someone who you think is better than you? Episode 4 is full of gems, but my favorite part that happens so quickly you could overlook it is Gangle's response to Jax about the clock being broken. Is it broken? Or are we the broken ones? I think the fact that she says we is very interesting because, at least to me, it seems like she's speaking more so to herself as opposed to any of the cast. If being herself in this place isn't working and trying to change herself isn't either, then is she broken? Is she incapable of being normal like everyone else? This scene stumped me for a while and I couldn't understand why. Though it's straightforward, something was on the tip of my tongue, and after 2 weeks, I finally found out what it was. It's the fact that this scene is so abruptly withdrawn. Like, you don't stop to realize how out of place this line is until you really think about it for a few moments and recognize what it's saying about Gangle. Contrary to popular belief, people don't immediately just jet to, "Am I broken?" after things aren't going well. As people, we cycle through options. We learn and adapt through trial and error. We experiment, and we only reach that point when we have exhausted every perceived option. That tells us that by this point, whether she's factoring in the real world with her circus endeavors, in her eyes, she has exhausted every perceived option. She's reached the point where change no longer feels in reach. You start to realize pretty quickly that the mask in this episode wasn't what the story wanted you to pay attention to. It wanted you to look at Gangle and recognize that there's something much deeper there. And it all comes around full circle in ways that we didn't quite think about. That's how it is when it comes to masking, right? People don't just mask for no reason. People do this out of a deep hurt or a deep self-disdain. What we've seen is only but a part of Gangle. There's something more that this episode is screaming at us to realize. But episode 4 still has more to say. As everyone's shifts come to a close, the impact of the exhausting work life is truly felt, especially in Gangle. By the end of her shift, she's almost like some sort of zombie. The deep grin on her new mask is now flipped completely upside down as she stands in that empty restaurant, now devoid of any customers, left feeling drowsy, woozy, and exhausted. But this scene hits a very specific nerve that I notice especially in Gangle's movements. You can see that she's slouching, almost lifeless. You don't need to analyze the scene too deeply to see that she doesn't want to be here. She can't even force her body to keep working anymore. But instead of the movements themselves, what I wanted to know at this point was what she was thinking. I bet she's wondering, why? Why am I here? Why am I doing this? And why am I not happy? The turning point of this episode, for us, for Gangle, and for this entire story as it leans into a theme that's been very consistent across every character, is when Pomni gives Gangle a much needed break. A much needed escape from that exact same normality that she believed she wanted. The imagery of throwing aside the new mask, revealing the tears underneath, shouldn't be impactful. But it is. It's so contradictory. A sad expression conveying happiness. It is weird. But at the same time, it's a start to some form of acceptance. This episode was our first look into the circus's punching bag and how she's not too different from you and I. But her arc isn't over. Not even close. As we shift into later episodes of the Amazing Digital Circus, we gradually learn more about our cast. Not just their silly avatars in the circus, but who they were when they still existed in the real world. Gangle naturally falls into that chain, which is what we see and hear all throughout episode 5. We learn that Gangle studied graphic design in community college. However, due to reasons that we still don't quite know, she would eventually end up dropping out, which is when she'd begin working in fast food, eventually obtaining that manager status like she told us back in episode 4. Now, while Gangle's statement is pretty straightforward, especially compared to those that follow, you notice something very quickly. The extent of Gangle's life that she initially chose to share was that she worked in fast food. But as Zooble pushed back, interrogating her known history as someone who loves art, it's then and only then that Gangle acknowledges her past artistic endeavors herself. Whether intentional or not, she overshadows her own passion, restricting herself to one thing for some reason, and I suppose maybe it's not too surprising. When you drop out, you can't really flaunt that around, but I still think it's a very sad thing to have something that you love unable to be shared. Maybe it's because she feels like she doesn't have any notable accomplishments. Maybe it's because she doesn't believe that she's good enough. You know, I noticed this scene pretty quickly, and it does speak to me on a certain level. Though this channel is quite new, I have been doing content creation for like the last decade across numerous channels, but I've never really made enough progress to let people into this thing I'm constantly doing. I always feel like I don't have much to show. I've been doing this my whole life. I don't have a play button, I don't have a gazillion dollars, so why bring it up at all? It's the barrier between passion and the idea of something being lucrative, of something being worthwhile. Do you guys feel that way about anything in your lives? You know, do you have something that you love, something that you've been doing for a long time that you just don't have that much confidence in? If you do, then you might not be too different from Gangle either. Up until this point, if it hasn't already been made clear, Gangle is meant to be considerably different from the rest of the cast. She's meant to represent vulnerability, both in how she expresses herself and how she allows herself to be treated, all while at the same time representing a tragic yet truthful side of humanity. But underneath Gangle's character, something that we already pointed out is that she's someone who is deeply troubled. We got a glimpse of that back in episode 4 with the masks, but a glimpse is all we got. That changes in episode 6. They all get guns. While hiding away from the war zone, Gangle and Zooble, two individuals both a little different from the rest, share a conversation that seems to escalate with each response. From the very start of the conversation, it's clear that Jax, someone who we've already established forces her to do things that she does not want to do, leaves a very clear impact on her that lingers. It's like even when he isn't around, she can't help but think about what he may do to her next. Jax's actions until this point have effectively looped Gangle into a constant state of dehumanization, or to lean more into that psychological angle as some of my other videos, she's been conditioned at this point to see herself as less. When you're treated a certain way constantly, especially in a way that you don't like, you eventually start associating yourself as that. If you're treated like a toy whose sole purpose is to have their comedy mask broken, then be sad for the rest of the episode, then eventually on the outside, you become a toy whose sole purpose is to have their comedy mask broken, then be sad for the rest of the episode. Opening up about how she doesn't always feel like a human with real emotions sets the tone for this entire conversation, but things immediately loop back to the Avatar gimmicks. Gangle's problem, at least in the circus, stems from this Avatar and how she's perceived and treated. It's a unique struggle in regards to her identity that the other characters simply don't have to deal with. How can you always feel like you, a human, someone with feelings and emotions, when you're constantly in cahoots with something that fundamentally is not you? These things that don't always reflect you, yet dictate how you're seen through the eyes of others, how can you feel like someone who matters? Where this conversation takes a twist that cements it as one of the best scenes in this series, in my opinion, is Zooble's advice. When Gangle outright asks, "How are you meant to love the part of yourself that makes you so much worse?" Zooble's answer is less of an answer as much as it's the harsh reality of what you realistically can do. All you can do is accept that part of you, recognize it as you, because it's still a part of you that's real, and over time intentionally just try to let it in. Not because you want to, but because ultimately it's all you can do. Everyone has a part of themselves that they dislike. Every single person. You, Gangle's voice actor, the people working at Glitch, me. No one is 100% content with themselves. If someone ever tells you that, they're lying. Being human is to be flawed. Being human is to be buried underneath imperfections. Now, with all that said, for you still watching and for Gangle, you don't have to like it, but you have to do it. It doesn't matter if it's not natural. You'll have to make a conscious effort to love those parts of yourself that you dislike, because you're you. I'm sorry if you don't want to hear this, but you will always just be you. I think in life, a lot of people try to erase who they are. There's a lot of people who reject those parts of themselves for years, decades. They never try to let those parts of themselves that they hate in. I've grown up around a lot of people like that. And you know what? Those are some of the saddest people in the world. I think that also getting the Tommy gun, while it is silly, is Gangle's response to Zooble's words. She hasn't given up, but instead, she's almost starting to embrace these silly aspects of herself. The Amazing Digital Circus always surprises me with how it establishes character arcs, because each and every time, it's not about magically healing somehow. It never is. The same applies to Gangle. Hating aspects of yourself is not something that gets healed after one deep conversation or one funny Tommy gun pull. No. As we see in episode 8, Gangle still very much feels that way with the imagery of masks surrounding her. But we know that she is trying, taking those baby steps. And really, what more can you ask for out of someone who reached rock bottom? But that is the circus's punching bag, and hopefully you guys care for Gangle in some way, shape, or form. She's a person with unique struggles just like you and I. But what stood out to you guys about her character arc? Let me know in the comments down below. With all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed. It's been Jax. Leave me a sub, especially if you guys want to see the Zooble video next week. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch all you guys next time.
Whatever happens, I've got your back if you've got mine.
Yeah.
So far, we've done a lot of observation regarding the negative effects that the circus has on individuals. But as we segue into this next one, while we, of course, still talk about the negatives, we look more so into the subtle yet existing beauty of the circus through a more simple character, Pomni. This is a really chill one, still some psychology here, but it's more laid back. Who is Pomni? The face of the Amazing Digital Circus? The Jester who makes friends with a gummy crocodile that dies in the very second episode? All of those are right, but who is she beyond that? Through the trials of the circus, Pomni becomes more than just a protagonist. She evolves into a product of the chaos. She becomes the Jester of fear, and at the same time, the embodiment of desperate connection. Two conflicting ideas that highlight the tragedy of her new life in a world that doesn't make any sense. But before we can get to that, we have to start at the beginning. Episode 1 is one of the most important episodes in the context of Pomni. This is when she's freshly introduced to the digital circus. As we all know, the circus is an overstimulating dystopia, full of mystical elements from head to toe. It's disorienting, and the natural response for anyone stepping foot in this world for the first time is to panic. For the entirety of her first time on the screen, and even well beyond this point, that panic becomes who she is. It's entertaining to watch, no doubt about that, but it's also where the initial disconnect for Pomni begins. While she's shrouded in panic, in a place completely unfamiliar to her with no way out, in contrast, everyone else is eerily calm. It creates a sense of distance between Pomni and everyone else before they even speak, adding to the unknown factor of the already terrifying environment. You're in a place all on your own, with people who you don't understand. That is a very scary thing from each and every angle. But unlike everyone else, Pomni can't simply just roll over and accept that this is her new reality. She clings to the idea of escape all throughout episode 1. She knows she saw a door that said exit on it regardless of what this weird AI says or what Jack says. It exists and she's going to find it. Whether by luck or some external factor, she does stumble upon that door, and that becomes her light in the darkness. Down the endless, silent halls, home will be in sight. She'll be free from this madness. That's felt so strongly until she reaches the end of that hall and she's met with the void. This door was her one shot at escape. The fact that this exit was also fabricated by this madness breaks her at the end of episode 1, giving us one of Pomni's most renowned expressions. This is called learned helplessness, and it's the basis for what breaks a lot of people in the digital circus. Escape feels so close, yet when you reach it, it's pulled away. You might try to find it again, you might even linger on that idea, but eventually, like everyone else, you will realize that there's nothing you can do at all. You're one of the many mice in a cage, and you are on the slower end to learn what it means to truly be helpless. By episode 2, that reality has set in. This is not a game, this is not a joke, and she's here for God knows how long. A dystopia full of people that you can't understand. Take a second to sit with that. That psychologically breaks people. It's the pinnacle of loneliness. But at the same time, that's why episode 2 becomes so important. When everything somehow shifts for the worse in the middle of everything, we see one of the most basic, yet most human forms of salvation arise. That being connection. Gummigoo learns that he's an AI. That is a heartbreaking revelation that he has to sit with on his own. But with Pomni, even if for a few moments, the two can both sit in that ambiguity and understand that mutual feeling of feeling like you're nothing. This scene with Gummigoo is the first time that a crack is put in the foundation of the digital circus. Empathy, hope, those all bleed into the monstrosity that this story thus far has been built upon. Up until this point, Pomni truly did feel alone, feel like she meant nothing when she entered the circus. The Gummigoo scene changes that. Gummigoo changes that. And while unfortunately Gummigoo doesn't make it to episode 3, the seeds of connection still remain. That in combination with the reveal that everyone cherishes those who don't make it, for the first time, a ray of light is visible in the otherwise dark circus. It isn't a convenient escape back to the real world, but rather the idea that connection is something that exists, something that's collectively cherished amongst the group. That's the ray of light. That's what shatters the barrier between her and the other characters, and the barrier between the unknown and the existing. As a testament to that, the next few episodes all feature significant steps towards the cast. The vulnerable scene with Kinger in episode 3 is a phenomenal example. At her lowest, what saves her isn't the possibility of escape, it's the hand of someone in the exact same situation as her. And in the context of Kinger especially, it's a sobering reminder that humanity does exist. That these people surrounding her have feelings. They cherish, they care. And ultimately, that's why none of these characters have abstracted yet. In episode 4, we see much the same, with her being there for characters like Gangle at some of their lowest points. Pomni doesn't just get consolidated. She actively chooses to be there when she can. It's arguably her hidden side. Through that fear, that anxiety, even through that idea of learned helplessness, she's always been someone who extends a hand out to people who need it. This trend of connection only keeps building as the story goes. In episode 5, we get a plethora of scenes involving Pomni learning about characters like Jax, who she finds out are actually a lot more nuanced than she gave credit for, and even growing close enough to critique characters like Ragatha. They All Get Guns is another prominent example of this, potentially the strongest example in the whole entire series. Jax and Pomni showcase a level of connection unlike anyone else she's partnered with in the cast. They didn't just bond or share a vulnerable scene, they thought like one another for a while. During this time, she got to live in the footsteps of Jax and act out of her element for a bit. Shooting people, shooting more people, trick-shotting people, and shooting more people. It's connection in its purest form. But only when you look back do you start to realize something. Something that shifts so naturally that you don't even realize it. That anxiety that was so prominent only a few episodes ago is essentially gone. You don't see it anywhere, and it makes sense why. It isn't that Pomni suddenly grows accustomed to the circus lifestyle, or that she gives up on escape. It's that she's found meaning in the chaos. The Amazing Digital Circus more often than not chooses to bury arcs in subtext. Each vulnerable scene, each encounter, all of them paint a clear idea of her evolution, and it's traceable all the way back to the beginning. Gummigoo teaches her that connection is still a real thing that can be found in the circus, both in NPCs and even in people, and it makes the whole thing a lot less dystopic. Kinger and Ragatha and Zooble and Gangle teach her that humanity is what they choose to preserve. In the circus, worth doesn't just disappear. That alone changes everything. Even Jax, though in his own weird and unique way, shows her that even the black sheep of the circus is still someone who feels, someone who deflects, someone who, underneath everything, is still so disturbingly human. I think episode 7 especially brings this to light. The entire cast holding hands as they approach Kane's office isn't meant to be a silly one-off Disney sequence. It might feel like it, but I promise it's not. It's meant to symbolize how much they've been through and how much they trust and appreciate one another because of that. But returning to what I mentioned a little while back, as Pomni grows closer to our cast, she over time becomes the resounding antithesis of fear. She steps into a more leader-appointed role. In episode 8, Kane also points this out directly. The depiction of leadership in the circus is at its strongest, and for most, if not all of it, Pomni is the one leading. She's even the one who suggests potentially giving up on escape entirely. The Jester who was running from this place only 7 episodes ago is now the same one suggesting that they may have to potentially stay forever. That line, which I think many people still overlook, despite episode 8 being out for quite some time now, is this character's entire arc distilled into a single sentence, essentially. The growth of Pomni is one about connection, freedom, and chaos. Episode 8 in a lot of ways is all about looking back on the journey to reach this point. The mirror scene where we get a flashback to Pomni 7 episodes ago, standing in this exact same spot, at the exact same angle, now a little taller, now more detailed, and now not afraid, is proof enough of everything. Despite everything, it's still you. This episode, in my eyes, completes Pomni's arc without leaving anything up to interpretation. So far on the channel, we've covered Jax, Ragatha, and Bubble, and for each and every single one, it always circles back to, we simply won't know the extent of their arcs until episode 9, but that's just not the case for Pomni. We've seen her beginning when she was the outsider, the one who we witnessed getting exposed to the circus every step of the way, hitting dead ends, losing her sanity. We've also seen her middle, finding solace and connection, finding peace in the idea that here, even though everything is crazy as hell, there's still love, appreciation, and a sense of community. And we've seen her end. After everything, she eventually becomes a sort of leader for the cast, the one who problem solves when everyone is broken, the one who wants the best for everyone, even people who have previously pushed her away. It's not the most complex arc in the world, but Pomni isn't meant to be the most complex character. She's meant to underscore what life is like in the circus. She gives the audience a real-time overview of that hell from each and every angle. It's kinda genius, but at the same time, while Pomni's arc can be seen as sweet in some ways, it is the complete opposite, and I'm sure you guys understand why. Salvation doesn't overwrite where you are. Having connection is nice. That allows her to survive and maintain her sanity. But she's still very much trapped in the circus. Environmentally, things haven't moved a square inch from where we started. I can't stress this enough. Pomni is a product of the circus. A place where connection, something that deeply defines her and to push further, saves her, is synonymous with an indefinite underlying tragedy. It is as grim as it gets. But with all that said, that is the Jester of fear and connection. What do you guys think about Pomni? On some of my other videos, I've seen people say that they would have preferred other characters who they consider to be more loaded to be the protagonist. What are your thoughts on that? There's a lot of discussion to be had in the context of Pomni. Have those discussions in the comments. Let me know your favorite parts. If you haven't already, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. Once I finish covering every character, I'm going to compile them all into a movie. We're missing Zooble, Gangle, Cain, and Abel. Whoever you guys want to see next, comment down below. Whatever comment gets the top likes, I'll probably cover them next. If you don't want to miss those videos when they release, turn on notifications. I haven't asked you guys to subscribe a single time in this video. Maybe I have, I don't know. But it's been Jax, and I'll catch you guys next time. And last but not least, to complete the first playlist, we have my most recent TADC analysis. We had to save the most interesting for last. Kinger, this one is my personal favorite and what I believe to be the most engaging. We take a look at loss and change through the lens of a man who's lost everything. With all that said, strap in. This last one is a ride.
In this world, the worst thing you can do is make someone think they're not wanted or loved.
Kinger is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most confusing characters in the entirety of the Amazing Digital Circus. At first, for many, he was just a beloved character with a story that didn't run too deep. But after episode 6 and every episode following, things changed. And by episode 8, the story was secretly asking us a grim question. What happens when you lose everything? Is it even possible to exist in nothing? What does that do to the psyche? What happens to the person? In today's video, we're going to be exploring how the story answers this question through the most unserious character in the circus, Kinger, and how he deals with loss. There's a lot to tell, a lot to say, and a lot of words to explain how you don't actually understand Kinger. So what better place to start than the beginning? However, because Kinger is so heavily imbued in the lore of the Amazing Digital Circus, we actually can't start at episode 1. We have to, weirdly enough, start at episode 8 and piece together Kinger's origins, then go from there. In episode 8, we learn that Kinger in the real world was a programmer at CNA. Now, contrary to what the cast, and maybe even the audience believed, CNA was a real company that specialized in the creation of AI, specifically generative AI that could create its own unique ideas, such as Cain, who actually was and still is Kinger's greatest accomplishment as a programmer. For a while at CNA, along with this group, including Scratch, they'd continue the development of AIs with a large emphasis on Cain, who had an entire team constantly working on him. At some point, though we don't know the exact details just yet, like everyone else who'd end up entering the circus, Kinger would put on a headset along with his group. Given what he says at the start of episode 8 to Queenie about how this was all his fault and he didn't expect this to happen, this was likely just meant to be a sort of performance test. So, Kinger with his group would put on the headsets one by one, and instead of what they were expecting, which we likely won't find out until episode 9, what they were met with was the circus, which was never meant to even exist in the first place. But alas, the act of putting on the headset was done, and from this point onward, Kinger, along with his group, would be trapped. An immensely colorful digital hellscape where anything can happen. That's the circus, and that's where this unfortunate group of people who had no business doing what they were doing ended up. Now, in this digital dystopia, status no longer mattered, and who they were no longer mattered either. Any power they once had in the real world was vacant here. Doesn't matter if they were programmers or not. A phenomenal example of this collapse in hierarchy is the visual of Scratch arguing with Kane. In this world, despite his immense genius, he's powerless and he knows it. That's why he's scared. But in the panic of everyone first setting foot in the circus, in the background of that chaos, Kinger would meet someone who he vaguely remembered in the real world. Though we nor they really know the extent of their real-life connection, in the circus these two would eventually be the first and last couple to ever get married. Even in the midst of that chaos, they tried to survive in any way they could. The act of marriage itself implies that in some way, they tried to normalize the circus to the best of their capabilities, bleed some humanity, some familiarity into that otherwise horrific world, and can you blame them? We see the exact same thing with our main cast. When you fight it, when you feed into the idea that there's a very real probability that you may never escape, the result won't be pretty. And speaking of, it wouldn't take Kinger and his group long enough to find that out. When things were already bad enough, the brilliant Scratch, the person who was so ahead of the team and knew the most, unfortunately would be the first person to experience abstraction. And from what we've already seen in the story, it's not surprising why things turned out this way. In the few seconds we actually see him, while everyone else is generally more laid back, you can see that he's outwardly panicking. Maybe due to his sheer brilliance, that he alone knew the true horrors that they were in for, or maybe there was some other reason, but regardless, he was scared, lost, and angry. But that doesn't matter. What matters is the horror that Scratch's abstraction exposed. Just as fast as you can find a sense of peace, you can be flung directly back into that chaos. Scratch, unfortunately, was likely a warning. Make the best of what you can. You never know when the end will come. So Kinger, along with his wife and the rest of the cast, presumably did exactly that, creating as many good memories as possible even through the chaos. But eventually, his group would, once more, continue abstracting one by one. Scratch's abstraction was likely just the beginning that struck fear in everyone, and the subsequent abstractions, I imagine, created this sort of domino effect. No matter how hard they try to normalize the circus or make the best memories, every time someone abstracts, it becomes a reminder of the fact that the normalcy they had forged, such as the act of marriage and whatever else they clung to, was nothing more than an illusion. When presented by that reality, people simply just cannot take that burden. Will I ever see my family again? Will I ever see my friends again? What's the condition of my body in the real world? How's my girlfriend doing? How's my boyfriend doing? It's a rabbit hole. One by one, everyone would be swept away, continuously, until eventually, Queenie would inevitably join that bunch too. Right under Kinger's tent, right before his very eyes, Queenie would find herself abstracted. But unlike the others, she wouldn't be lost in a fit of rage. In that darkness that, for some reason, seems to calm down those who have abstracted, she'd gaze at Kinger one last time. They could touch one last time, creating such a disturbing yet peaceful scene. Physical contact with a Lovecraftian-esque being, someone you love, yet someone you know you'll never be able to speak to again. That's a horrific sight, but it was the reality of the circus that Kinger had started to see. Only moments later, Queenie would be sent down to the cellar just like everyone else, and Kinger, the last of his group, would be forced to sit with his endless losses. Everything, everyone. Though he couldn't remember his exact relationships with everyone, he knew they were friends. The silence hurt, yet those good memories were still there. But even so, Kinger's tragedy wasn't over. If you think the first group of his closest friends and co-workers was the end of his story, you are gravely mistaken. Even after the appearance of Ragatha's group consisting of Pomni and everyone else, the losses continued. Before the story even began, they lost Ribbon. Later on, they would also lose Kaufmo, and maybe even other characters that we simply don't know about. For Kinger, losing everyone was the start. Lacking the agency to have someone comfort you in these dark times was the start. But alas, everything he saw, everything he knew, we wouldn't know. No one would know. He'd bleed into the background, becoming nothing more than one of the few silly models, just like everyone else. And all of this brings us to episode 1. From the very moment the Amazing Digital Circus begins, Kinger is established as nothing more than some crazy old guy who lives in a tent inside the tent of the circus. Strange. Anyhow, that is the extent of his character for a while, and everything about him perfectly reflects those labels. His lines are more often than not jumbled, and he finds himself asking questions and saying things that don't really align in any way, shape, or form. Such as how in episode 1, after Zooble gets swallowed by the glowing queen, he asks if they saw a game show in there.
You didn't experience a game show in there, did you?
What are you talking about?
There's a lot of Kinger moments like this. Not to mention that his memories are constantly scrambled. He forgets things that literally just happen, which further contributes to the idea that he's a nutcase in every sense of the word. He brings a unique vibe, certainly, but beyond that, he's just kind of there. He's what I'd personally call a comedic liability. He's someone who the characters have to actively keep an eye on, that type of person. For the first 2 episodes, that continues to be Kinger's character. He's there, he's funny, but that's really it. However, everything abruptly changes in episode 3. The episode where, in one single scene, his entire arc, his entire character, changes in less than a few minutes. In episode 3, The Mystery of Mildenhall Manor, like the previous episodes, there's a lot of Kinger shenanigans, okay? By this point, Kinger and shenanigans go hand in hand. Because of his overall impulsivity and lack of thinking, along with Pomni, they find themselves in a very disastrous sequence of events. They're being hunted by some Lovecraftian-esque monster. They're being dragged down to hell, having their souls taken over. This is still one of the most intense episodes to this date. It all just becomes way too much, especially for Pomni, who still barely even understands what's going on in the circus at all at this point. It's important to remember that she practically just got here. From being chased by an abstraction on her first day to being stuck under the map due to a glitch, and now this is what I imagine to be the make or break moment for her character. She is en route to abstracting, something that Kinger has gotten all too familiar with. In this terror, when she breaks down on her last legs, what she needs in this moment is someone to comfort her. Someone who she can talk to, not at. It goes without saying, that's not a role for Kinger. Or, at least, it shouldn't be. For some reason, in this moment, he changes. He's not the same person. His muddled sentences that were barely even connected before somehow start forming in this almost poetic fashion where every line that leaves his mouth is an emotional beat on its own. In this state engulfed in darkness, Kinger has to some degree regained his memory, but this moment without a single doubt will be a fleeting occurrence. Of all the things he could say that he hasn't been able to say, of all the things he should say which he never could say, he instead chooses to sit with Pomni in this moment of despair, which takes us back to his final moments with Queenie. That moment in the darkness of the tent where they got in one more moment before she'd be gone for good. That circles endless loops in his mind. It's the first thing he thinks about when he's able to think straight again. It's not a happy memory by any means, but bad memories are one side of the coin. On the other side, there's good memories, the times they were able to smile. It reveals a truth about the circus that Kinger's learned over the time he's spent here. The circus can be an immensely monotonous place. In fact, let me correct myself. I won't downplay it, it always is, always. But to Kinger, those good moments in the middle of that darkness are what they need to cling to. It's optimism in dystopia. Potentially even unfounded optimism. But it's what got him through yesterday, the day before, and the day before that. Even at the time of this episode releasing, this was immensely heartfelt because it touched on a very real thing. The same way the circus can feel endlessly monotonous, very deeply connects to the same way the real world can feel endlessly monotonous. Working a shitty job you hate every day, going to school every day to work for your degree, that stuff is not only exhausting, but after so long, it disorients you. Eventually, if you sit in that monotony, you will reach a state similar to that of abstraction. Now, granted, this state is a lot less dystopian, but you may fall into a pool of depression, or worse. Now, listen, this can go beyond just working or going to school. There was one point in my life where existence itself felt monotonous as hell. When you've been through some stuff, that really does alter your perception of the world. It's unfortunate, but it's how we're wired as humans. But in those moments, it's important to remember that the side of the world you're experiencing is only a half of what the world can be. I've been sitting with that a lot lately, especially. I've been getting out more, I've been doing more biking. I've been doing things that I don't traditionally do, and I guess what you can say is that I've been forging a lot of good memories of my own to cling to. And I mean, this is just the stuff I've been doing around the house. Good memories can really do a lot for you. That hope in the darkness, that realization that the grim parts of life aren't the only parts, those mean something to Kinger, and it's how he got this far, and I hope they mean something to you guys too. This scene tapped into that universality that we likely all have experienced. But especially in the context of Kinger after episode 8, this scene is damn near reformed. You can't look at this through anything more than pity almost. This is a man who's lost everything, everyone. But this is also a man who never front-loaded his pain, so we simply never knew. We were always only able to see the surface, but getting to see beneath that for the first time, it's almost terrifying, but it's beautiful how he's able to utilize his pain to be there for someone else. While episode 3 subtly shifts how we perceive Kinger as a character, this moment is once more knowingly fleeting. To us, the audience, to Kinger, and to Pomni. From here onward, it's back to nothing, which I find to be so damn depressing. Imagine knowing that once you get up and walk away, you're going to practically be someone else. Imagine using what could realistically be your last opportunity at normalcy to calm down one of your friends. These actions say so much about Kinger and what he values, and it's why we care. It's why you care, even if you couldn't fully articulate why. His last moment is one that's built on the idea of being selfless. Not once in his return is it ever about him. It's about the existing beauty of what it means to be human, especially in the circus. But alas, just as we stated, that moment was fleeting. Not even before the end of the episode, Kinger is back to his usual crazy self, with us and Pomni being the only witnesses for who he truly is beneath. And so, one episode passes. Nothing. 2 episodes pass. Nothing. But on the third, in episode 6, they all get guns. When you least expect him, for some reason, he's there. Kinger's conversation with Ragatha in this episode, hands down, is my favorite scene in this whole entire series. And once more, it's a scene that speaks a great deal to his own suffering. In the losers bracket, after Ragatha and Kinger were the first pair to get erased in this scuffed battle royale, the tone of the scene from the beginning is noticeably off. Ragatha is off. Ragatha throughout the story usually comes across as optimistic, expressive. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find a scene where she's not shining as bright as ever. But here in the darkness, that version of her is nowhere to be seen. It brings out who Kinger is underneath, and just like Pomni, he gets past her walls, finding the center of what's actually bothering her. Ragatha's conflict that's eating away at her is that she tries to be there for everyone. She tries so hard, but when she fails to do that like anyone inevitably would, she consumes that failure, turning it into something personal, as opposed to something that structurally just is not designed to work. This, in the background, starts eroding her. I'm sure this isn't the first time she's felt like this throughout the story. I'm sure there's been many times off camera where she's broken down in her room or away from the cast. That would not surprise me. But to us and Kinger, it's clear that Ragatha's perspective of relationships is warped, and it's clear that she's lost. So, pulling from his own experience as someone who's been married and someone who's had endless connections throughout his life, both in the circus and in the real world, he sits with her and just talks. He reminds her of the fact that relationships are meant to be two-sided. The second that one person begins trying to pull all the weight, that relationship fundamentally starts failing because both sides aren't equally supporting. It makes for a sort of disconnect, such as what we see and witness with Gangle and her natural suspicion towards Ragatha. The people-pleasing, the trying to be there for everyone, the yearn to have people not hate her, it all starts forming a very certain picture in Kinger's mind. Something that she won't say outright, yet he understands clearly, because he knows what it's like to be at the bottom. The truth that he extracts from Ragatha's words and her demeanor is that she hates herself. Now, I don't believe this is for one reason. I think it's a compounding effect. The trauma from her mother, the idea that she has to be there for everyone, the self-torture she inflicts upon herself when that fails. It is a myriad of things that have gone unchecked for far too long, but I don't blame her. Who can you really talk to about this, especially in the circus? Especially when you're meant to be the one that's supposed to play that role for everyone. Instead of loving herself, she wants people to love her in her stead. In some distorted way, she's convinced herself that if everyone loves her, everything works out. When in reality, that couldn't be farther from the truth. But you know what? In a very surprising turn of events, Kinger doesn't tell Ragatha to not hate herself. He instead sits with her and talks with her, not at her. It brings rise to something that fully connects his entire story.
I hated myself. I couldn't help but hate myself for the things I thought I was responsible for. I thought I'd lost everything. But then you showed up. And my outlook just changed.
Though we didn't understand at the moment, after episode 8, we do. After everyone unexpectedly got trapped in the circus while following his lead, abstracting one by one right before his eyes, how do you think he felt? Walking around that circus in silence, feeling guilty, feeling sad, hurt. Who's left to blame? Scratch? He also worked on Kane. Maybe it can be his fault, but it can be because he's gone. Not just him, but everyone. You are surrounded by the silence of a world that took everything away from you. In this room, you are the only thing breathing, moving, and thinking. That guilt, whether it's truly warranted or not, turns inwards. Of course you start hating yourself. This is the entire idea of survivor's guilt. It's grim. It's scary. It's cold, metaphorically, maybe even physically. You start to feel like if you look hard enough again, you may find Queenie or Scratch, someone to share this inexplicable pain with. So you do. You search and search and search, but you find nothing. You roam endlessly one day after another, and it compounds, it builds, but you don't break. You simply just lose feeling until someone out of nowhere, like a form of divine blessing, arrives. That person being Ragatha. You don't know why, you don't know how, but without knowing, the presence of another person regrounds you, and in turn, saves you. Ragatha was the first to arrive after the main group, and that alone proved that he hadn't lost everything. Even though the people he once loved were now gone, he had a new opportunity to make sure the same thing doesn't happen again. She saved him, and now, after who knows how long, he finally can return the favor. The conclusion of this scene isn't to not hate yourself. Some words won't magically change that. But instead, it's to alleviate some of that burden. The circus is notorious for making you feel like you aren't a person. But sometimes you need a reminder that you are. Ragatha, at the end of the day, is but one person. No one expects her to be there for them 24/7, and that need for some form of validation needs to, at some point, come from within. It doesn't have to be today. Hell, it doesn't have to be next year. But eventually, it needs to happen. Episode 6 was a fundamental episode for Kinger because it reinforces the fact that he's someone who's been deeply hurt. But it also reinforces the fact that he's someone who uses his loss to help those around him. And, believe it or not, this is the end of Kinger's arc. The next time we see this version of Kinger again is in episode 8, which is less about him as much as it's about his experience with CNA. So, we're left with but one more thing to say before we reach the end of this video. With other Digital Circus characters, we watch all of their arcs start and even evolve in real time over the course of the story. This applies to every single main character, no exception. But Kinger's arc had nothing more to tell because it was already completed before episode 1 even began. He doesn't have a super grandiose emotional journey that we see every step of the way of. The reality is, surely because of how long he's been in the circus for, that journey has already happened. Many times over, in fact. That's kind of what the brief flashback in episode 8 is all about. Losing Scratch, losing Queenie, losing his group, and sitting with that silence, that is Kinger. But instead of having this journey that's trying to reach an endpoint, we have less of a journey as much as an opportunity with everyone to make things right this time. To make sure they escape, to make sure they get home, and to make sure the circus can never take anything from anyone again. Kinger's arc isn't simply about loss and magically becoming a better person. It's about loss and sitting with the isolation of those feelings. It's about taking the time to actually be better, to do better. That's the beauty of turning loss into meaning, and how the Amazing Digital Circus explores this through Kinger, the most unserious character in the entire show. With all that said, thank you guys so much for watching. This video marks the 6th TADC analysis I've released, and with that said, the entire main cast has been finished. I wanted to make sure we ended with a bang, so I put a lot into this Kinger video. I hope y'all enjoyed it. But with that said, we still have a lot more to cover. Playlist 1 is done. Next up, we have characters like Ribbit, Kaufmo, Ming. Yes, Ming. Kane, Scratch. You name it. So comment down below who you guys want to see next. I have this jitter in the back of my mind that people are going to say Kane. Don't know why, but it's been Jax. Please, if you're new, drop a like and subscribe. Especially if you enjoyed this video, because if you guys don't subscribe, you're never going to see me again, and I'm going to stay a small YouTuber forever. My goal currently is 10K. That would absolutely mean the world to me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch all you guys next time. And with all that said, for those of you still watching, which of you are, thank you so much. You guys have reached the end of this video, so I want to say one last thing as we just close everything out. The reason why I set out to make this playlist was because, in the context of the Amazing Digital Circus, I felt like there was a serious disconnect in the discourse that this story had. That realization kind of saddened me, to be honest, because this story, while you could be mixed about it, does a lot of unique things, specifically tapping into our nature as humans. It makes for so many unique angles, especially when bringing in the context of psychology that can just be utilized for so many interesting videos that I felt just weren't there. But not just that, when discussion did exist, I realized that it leaned more towards being based on emotion as opposed to objective facts and logic. It took away from these characters when people were headcanoning what may have happened as opposed to what the story itself tells us happened. As an analyst, that is one of my biggest pet peeves. Stay to the text. Don't theorize on character deep dives. These arcs are constructed this way for a reason. They're not made for you to headcanon your own details and use those as definitive. This lack of thorough discussion was something I noticed across every single character, so I made these videos solely to stick with the text and expand their stories through broader lenses, such as psychology or even personal experience. I had a blast making these, and as you can probably tell, the quality over time increases a lot. I learned a lot working on these videos, and this is probably my favorite playlist I've ever created. But with all that said, let's not spiral into a rant. Thank you guys so much for watching. You've probably seen a lot of CTAs in this video. I won't hand you another one. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much. I'll catch all you guys next time.